So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and, like, well-respected. All these other wallets that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like, it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. Reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to. And so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. If you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. The person's not named in the report who is donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami. But that person eventually, they're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like this Coinbase. It seems like they're, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like from the arms of one huckster to another. Like it's almost to something worse. They're really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal, and we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there. And all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like, assets, you can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great. But it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, if I owe $2 billion.
Right.
That's this thing. So all this money's going in. And then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time...
down, because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
That's the issue. Was FTX's problem was not CZ. Ultimately, he's kind of the guy who like pushed over the House made. They've recently been shut down, but the idea was
just the idea of putting your money into Tornado Cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better?
Because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want ads, like get rich quick schemes. Like you've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis telling you, they're like 25 years old telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million service that said you cannot move. Like when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? What are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then
so when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
I hadn't really found my footing, but throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. Annoying. So
that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're publicly traded. It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C. The money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to really perpetuate their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. And that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cohodes, he's a famous short seller. He was kept making the videos. And ultimately they never did. But I start doing that, and after I covered get rich quick schemes for a while, where he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be, there would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? He happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have
this big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west. He's like, well, think of it like a box. And, you tell a bunch of investors, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. Reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says, I lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. He's basically screaming about, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, it had gotten... He's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was... It's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and everyone got to look at it all at once in one place. And people noticed, wait a second. A lot of their assets are just their own tokens. Like, they had a Serum token, which they controlled most of. Really taking that... maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that...
there were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And they wanted... Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy...
What was his... I remember, but what was his
caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all.
It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking
make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had. He was really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane, but most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, information about that. He says, hey, you withdraw. There's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to this random external address because you send it to a different one.
People that were standing out and saying none of this makes sense.
Right. And
who were those people?
So there were a few people. There was eventually got paid out $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's November was when all the abilities, it's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's
balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? I forgot. It's so silly.
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
change that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. What is the difference between the two? Whiz Kid, who you listen to him talk, he has an answer for everything. He's so articulate. He's so knowledgeable. I listened to previous interviews before he got busted.
Outright the proceeds of criminals. We know that these criminals do launder their money through a lot of these crypto exchanges, through mixers. It's just sort of the... And one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director, and he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know. On sticks or something. Like, it was never, the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that you just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars, and so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch of
regulated. Like, if he was doing this, like, Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC to store your money somewhere else. How do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me, I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of, of a bottom line for ExxonMobil. Or any, that's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is he thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like, they had hidden all their numbers. Like, Sam had list stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it he's
with regulators? They were all trying to. Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed, and CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this like battle between them. And ultimately, you can't do that and then say, "Oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars." Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games. Yeah, that's why I lost the money.
But
involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019, and that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like, fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt, and he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative, right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. Like, it's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. He said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws? They never ended up doing that. Some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Like, and lateral like dollars or like some asset will give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin, and that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value of was going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big like kind of scam that her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources. These guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys do these trades that are profitable in crypto? So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese. Ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, you have Dogecoin, you have SafeMoon, you have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange. So they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money, was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're great, but even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit, like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no victims would reach out to me, they'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. It's left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the money. Might be one of the first, like, trillionaires or whatever. Like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys. Or never understood how Bernie Madoff got people, because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I notice with all of these things, the thread is, like, actually his whole technique of shifting the blame, like, onto Alameda and, like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore.
Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. Like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. Oh, Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who he's the son of two Harvard lawyers. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader.
I watched the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah.
About him trying
that's John Ray.
Yeah. Trying to unravel it. And it's amazing.
You're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities?
When he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like, what could they have possibly done to make it easy?
Calling that a fraud early. I have a buddy of mine. He goes by Dirty Bubble Media on Twitter. He's like one of the Anon Twitter accounts. He was calling it a fraud.
I don't really understand what's going, like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one, because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it. Right. It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. Like it's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his and it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to even before that, I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick. So God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So he just ours and I'd go because it was like my friends said, hey, we have to get somebody. You want to go? And I was like, sure, I'll go. I was kind of fascinated. And you'd see these guys.
It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore accounts and stuff. They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you win.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I study, put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting one Ethereum into will fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like, you have to do, I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, it's almost used, now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, but I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, a lot of people had, there were things that were coming out, like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So, like, the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. What they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, there was fungibility between wallets. What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and, like, building the kind of the rule book around, like, hey, like, if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like,
why the celebrities are important. And that's why
it's a huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part. Yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I'm, everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, in the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized, like, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology. And there was a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
That is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy.
Or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? I started hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, like, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like, they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is, senator's office reached out to me. And they're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to, this is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, y'all, fight, like, one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like, like, take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that, because very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like, gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer.
What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it. Hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some, like, third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that
one guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their. Yeah. So by the third interview, I'd studied him, and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to, it was the terms of, and then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX give you this yield. He starts explaining, like, this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme. And so ultimately, Matt Levine's like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stopped short. But FTX was sort of the worst offender. Is, let's say I give you a loan, Joe. So an unsecured loan would be, I give you $1 million and I don't ask for anything. And why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time, Sam goes, oh, you won, like, our battle. And people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? It's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they, it's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, executives Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, yeah, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. Sam, the CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this, a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did everything. That's right. But
also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah,
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like
finance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box. Okay, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations,
not having sort of like it's maybe not big enough, they're good people. A lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But the handle now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police, and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? And it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill like was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly like he'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal.
Do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. You can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this like fancy language for a way to like anonymize your transaction. Like you put it, a lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the like most fair case you could make about the fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett, that when everything goes wrong, like they tracked his account, he's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX. Wow. Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance? And then when you have him on, there's a lot of, I wasn't aware, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that, I don't know. There was all this hemming and...
they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, like be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just means playing League of Legends while on investment calls. Like, at the time, that was seen as this charming, like, genius thing.
On calls.
On calls. You could hear even actually, companies, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage. If you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China. Like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here. Maybe that's a big deal. Something. Because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime, any store. Find out, like, there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy, Dan, what that was to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our bad. The